I also work with people on developing their symbolic language vocabulary so that they can interpret their own stuff, because that's the language of spirit. Spirit
Yeah.
speaks in symbols. It
Yeah.
doesn't really, I mean, sometimes they'll talk to you in words, but the richer conversation, you really need to learn how to develop that vocabulary with your guides, because that gives you deep, deep layers of meaning that if you're insisting on having it be a verbal conversation, you're going to miss out on a lot of the conversation.
Welcome to The Reluctant Medium, where we cover the gamut of out there conversations. With an open mind and a curious heart, we want to talk about it all. From psychic phenomena and energy medicine to beings from other star systems and out-of-body experiences. You'll find a great balance between grounded science-backed topics and others that science hasn't quite caught up to yet. I'm your host, Dr. Maria Rothenberger, a psychotherapist by trade and a reluctant spirit baby communicator. And hey, even though I'm a medium, I'm not buying everything folks are selling. I just have a voracious appetite to know more about what I call the world of the weird. Join us on your favorite podcast platform or watch on YouTube at The Reluctant Medium. I'll see you there. Hey everyone, welcome to The Reluctant Medium. I'm Dr. Maria Rothenberger, your host for the podcast. And today we have a guest who basically knows everything. Kelle Sparta, the spirit doctor. She's a transformational shaman, which, what is that? First, I need to know what that is. And an executive coach for spiritually minded CEOs, business owners, coaches, and serious spiritual seekers. Welcome, Kelle Sparta.
Thank you. You know, my husband says that too. He's like, he needs a t-shirt that says, you know, who needs Google? My wife knows everything. You know?
That's right.
Which is not true, but I do know a lot of things. I just very deep on a wide variety of subjects.
Yes. Yes. Well, all right. Tell me what a transformational shaman is. First, I just have to know that.
Yeah. So there are a variety of different types of shamans out there, and a transformational shaman is specifically someone who works with people on their personal evolution. And so I use shamanic practices and ancient techniques and energy work to help people grow and evolve as they are expanding into their next layer of themselves. So walking people through shamanic deaths and rebirths and identity shifts and taking your step into that next level that you know you can do, but you don't know how to get to. That's my jam.
This is how you do it.
This is how we do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Right at the
roof. Showing my age on that one.
Oh, my age too, girl. My age too. Well, in case y'all are wondering, there's probably going to be a fair bit of songs popping in here and there during this interview.
Kind of a way we roll. Yes.
That is so stinking cool. Okay. So how did you know that you needed to be a shaman? How did you know? Is there a calling?
That's a story. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Oh, do tell. We love
it. So my mother raised me in the New Age movement. So I have been studying personal growth and development, energetics, religion, occult practices, you know, anything and everything I could get my hands on, Golden Dawn, OTO, whatever. Since I was 5 years old, I was raised on Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and J.C. Knight and, you know, all the people, right? My mother brought home Est when I was 6 years old, which is like the not kinder, gentler version of Landmarks Forum. It was the early version of Landmarks Forum. And so I've been doing this stuff for as long as I can remember. My mother said I was talking to ghosts in my crib. And so she had been psychic when she was younger and she was scared of it. And so she shut it down and she never figured out how to open it back up again. And she was absolutely determined that that would not happen to me. And so she made a point to make sure that she got me education, that it was okay, and that I wouldn't be scared of it and all of the things, right? Bless her. And so that brought me through to into the New Age movement, right? And so this was the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up. And the New Age movement had this particular energy to it. And it was all about how do we use our energies and it was positive psychology, it was manifestation and believing things into being, right? So that brought me into that. And then I went to college and wandered afield from a lot of this stuff for a few years. And then came back in when I was at my Saturn return, which, yay, happy joy, Saturn return.
I don't know what
And
Saturn return means.
okay,
I
so
do
your
think she knows
Saturn
it.
return is when Saturn comes back into the same place in your birth chart, in your chart, as it was when you were born. And so it's the great disruptor. Saturn is the reason why we have midlife crises, right?
Oh,
So it shows up every 28 years. And so I'm actually coming up on my second one in a few years. This is gonna, yeah, okay. But the first one is when you're 28, usually. And so I had reached the American dream and I hated my life. So I had become very successful in my career and I had a trophy husband. I mean, the man was gorgeous. And like every gay man I had in my life wanted him. And we had a big house with 2 cars and a dog on a cul-de-sac. And we had everything that the American dream said you should have. And I hated my life. And so I just leveled it. I divorced my husband. I made him take the dog. We sold the house. I moved out of state to live with a bunch of people I met at the Renaissance Fair. And so I sold my business. My former business partner said I ran off and joined the circus, and he wasn't wrong, right? So, as it turned out, all of these people were magical. They were shamans and witches and people who were in an energetic path. And so I spent the next 4 years doing a deep dive of healing on myself and helping them to heal as well. We helped each other. It was a healing community, magical community. And so it was really quite perfect for where I was. And through that, I got exposed to ritual as opposed to my earlier training had been in self-hypnosis and tarot cards and just sort of self work, right? And through this new group, I got exposed to ritual and the powerful effects that doing things in a ritual fashion the things that can move for you, which don't move in other ways or not easily. And so I really learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about sympathetic magic and how that worked. I walked the Wiccan path for a while. And then one day, I had never even heard of shamanism at this point. One day, I was going into the basement. Now, this is an old Victorian house. And so, the basement lights were pull strings in the middle of the room, right? And so I was going into the basement to get something at night. And I was walking in the dark, feeling for the pull string, right? Because I couldn't find it. And it was very dark in the basement. And I suddenly felt, oh my gosh, I just walked through spider webs. And I'm like, okay, whatever I need is not important. I will get it in the morning when I can see. And so I turned around and went back up the stairs. And for those of you thinking, why didn't you turn your phone flashlight on? This was 2000, okay? We didn't have phone flashlights, okay? And I wasn't going to go find a flashlight upstairs. And so I went back upstairs and then I came back down the next day and there were no spider webs in the room. Like none, no indication that I'd broken any. And then I realized that there had been no spider webs on me when I had gone back upstairs from being down there. And so I talked to one of the people in the house and I was like, this happened. And he said, oh, you should really pay attention to that. He said, grandmother spider is calling you. And if you don't listen to her, she may do to you what she did to me. And I'm like, what did she do to you? And he said, well, she had a nest of baby spiders crack open over top of my bed and come down and chew on me to get my attention. And I'm like, I don't want that. How do I talk to grandmother spider? I don't know anything about this. Why does grandmother spider want to talk to me? I knew nothing, right? This was a whole new world for me. And he was like, yeah, he said, you really should deal with this. And so he gave me some instructions on how to talk to grandmother spider and figure out what was going on. And so I started having a conversation with what would turn out to be one of my primary totems. And as I was talking with her, I started getting more and more instructions and more things to do. And I
And is
started
this
being
during
on.
meditation? I'm sorry, is
I,
that
yeah,
during
these
meditation?
are sort of meditations. Yeah. Um, eh, yeah, I was doing more meditations at the time. Nowadays, I don't bother to sit down and meditate. I just talk to her. But back then, yes, I was sitting down and doing meditations. And so, grandmother spider, I started to come into a relationship with her through the meditations, right? And so when I went on walkabout the following year, I actually was doing it as I was getting a tattoo as a dedication to grandmother spider. And so I had this dream before I left of all these tattoos that would eventually be on my back when I was very old. And I could see them all on my back. Now, I am a strict no pain for beauty kind of girl, right? It's like, no. But these were not about beauty. These were about commitments. They were life markers, right? And so now I have two of those on my back. I have a third one that probably needs to go on there shortly. But grandmother spider was the first one. And so here's the thing, right? You asked how I ended up being a shaman. And there's a whole story about the walkabout and everything else, and it's on my blog if you want to see it. But the upshot is that I became a shaman because spirit grabbed me by the throat, threw me on the ground, and said, "You're mine." And I was not really given an option, right? So, weird things happened along the way too. Like so here's a fun story, right? This is a very shaman thing that happens, right? I'm sitting in a restaurant with one of my students, and this random guy calls me out of the blue, and he says, "Who is this?" And I'm like, "You're calling me. You need to tell me who you are." And he said, "Well, I just got out of court. I just lost custody of my children, and I didn't know what to do. And I put my visor down because I haven't slept in a couple of days. And so I put my visor down to take a nap in the car. And your flyer came falling out onto my lap for this workshop that I had not run. I literally may have put out like 15 of these flyers before I decided that I wasn't going to run the workshop. And it was like months before, right?" He said, "Your flyer came out of my visor and landed on my lap. And I figured this was a sign and I needed to talk to you." And so I was like, "Oh, okay. Where are you?" And I said, "Okay, you're in my town. Let's meet at the local donut shop and we'll sit down and we'll talk." And he said, "Okay." And so then, and what was funny is that my student had just before the phone rang, looked at me and said, "So what's next?" The phone rang and I was like, "This is what's next," right? And so that's just kind of how life was running at that time, and how life kind of runs still now. But so we showed up, and it turns out he was having these major callings, like he could see wolf packs following him and stuff like this. And I'm like, "Okay, you're being called by spirit and you're being called to be a shaman." And he's like, "I don't know what that means." I said, "Welcome to the club." I didn't know it either. Right. And so, we had a conversation, and I sent him out to his car to take a nap because dude was really not compos mentis at the moment because he was so sleep deprived. And while he was having his nap, I was talking to my student, and I went to the bathroom, and I'm sitting on the toilet and I'm talking to spirit. And I said, "Okay, I caught this one for you, but this is not what I do." And they're like, "No, no." I said, "No, I don't want this. I don't want to catch all of these people. This is not what I do." They're like, "No, you're the only one within a 75-mile radius." And I'm like, "Fine, I will catch this one for you." Just want to be clear. This is not what I want to do. They're like, "Yep, no problem." But this is how being a shaman is, right? So I got him on track, got him moving forward, and off I went to the races. And I left for walkabout shortly thereafter. But this is kind of how it is with shamanism. It's just, it calls to you. It says, this is who you're going to be. And the thing about shamanism, as opposed to other traditions, right? Shamanism brooks no bullshit. It literally, I've watched people in the Wiccan community, and some of them do their work and they do hardcore work. Don't get me wrong. But you can be in the Wiccan community for decades and not do any work, and it's not a big deal. The spirit will be patient with you. When you get to it, you get to it, and they're very patient. Not so much with shamanism. With shamanism, they're like, clue by 4 to the forehead, right? Oh, you didn't get the message? Let's hit you a little harder, right? It's like, no, this is the next step. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. And you literally have to leave spirituality behind to get that to stop. You have to completely turn your back on spirit to get that to stop. And so I've seen a couple of people do that in my lifetime. I've seen a couple of people go, I'm out. But everybody else is just like, buckle up, buttercup. Here we go, right? So I tell people all the time, I'm like, don't be a shaman if you don't have to. It's a really hard path. But, if shamanism is whacking you upside the head, you best turn around and say, okay, before it whacks you to the ground, because there's none of that.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like a calling. It sounds like a freaking get the fuck in here right now. That's what it sounds like.
Every shaman I know has a similar story. There are certain hallmarks of shamanism, and that's one of them. Another one is that you will experience a shunning at some point in your life where you are kicked out of community. And that's actually part of traditional shamanic initiation practices. And so it's to teach you that you don't have to be in community, that you won't die if you are shunned. And that keeps you honest about the messages that you bring through, because then you're not going to change them to avoid shunning. Because you've lived through shunning, you can do it. You'll be okay on the other side. So you just speak truth. That's what it's about. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about my personal experience?
Yeah.
Do you start having really intense dreams about shit that's like, what does that even mean?
Sometimes. Depends on the person, but yeah, that can be one of the indicators.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So the grandmother spider thing completely lit me up. Spiders have been showing up for at least a year now for me. And dreams have been concentrated in the last month or two that are so beyond what I can even explain. Like I had a dream, and they're about animals. I had a dream about a bear coming into our campsite, and we all went inside, we were safe, whatever. Then a giant black panther, giant, like monster, a room size, comes out behind the forest and leaps on the bear. And then it got gruesome. So I don't want to totally talk about that, but I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what does that even mean? And I wasn't fearful. I wasn't scared. In the dream, I was just watching this happen. But I'm like, what is going on here?
So the panther, so I don't know a lot about panthers energetically, but I will give you from big cat perspective, and I may be wrong, so you should go look panther up. But big cats tend to be high up in the trees, and they tend to leap out of nowhere. And cats are they're an apex predator, right? And so they have no natural enemies, and they don't worry about anything. But bears are also at the top of the food chain, right? So you have two apex predators. Now, what's interesting though is that bear I've got a lot of information on. And what's interesting is that bear is known for hibernating for long periods of time, for going inside, and this is their time for self-reflection, whatever. And mama bear is an archetype, right? She's the protector. She's she looks out for her cubs. She's dangerous when around her cubs because she will be unpredictable because of them. Because if she thinks you're a threat, she's coming for you. But there's also this sense of the teddy bear and the energy of the teddy bear and the comforting and the whatever. So bear is both scary and cuddly at the same time, right? And bear is about being sort of in that balance. So in Norse mythology, Odin has one eye that sees into the other world and one eye that sees into this world. And so bears are kind of the animal equivalent of Odin because they hibernate for so long that they're in the other world. So half of their lives are in one world and half in the other, roughly, right? And so they're kind of the equivalent of that Odin energy. And so having one of them attack the other and having one be so much bigger than the other is relevant, because in a dream of that nature, I would say that the panther and the bear would represent two aspects of yourself. And I would say that the panther would represent the part of you that's the sort of real world, quote unquote, right? The real world self, the practical self, all of this stuff. And the bear would represent the spiritual self, right? And to have the real world self attack the spiritual self, and who won? The panther?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
assumed, because he was so much bigger.
Bear was
right?
gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that says to me that there's an internal battle happening for you. And, do you want to be in the real world, quote unquote, or in the spiritual world, right? And
Ah,
in the physical versus the spiritual. And in your dream, in that space, there was a wish fulfillment of you getting to just be your physical world self.
interesting. Thank you for that. And is this, I'm assuming, but maybe I shouldn't assume, that's the kind of work that you do with clients?
Sometimes I've got a deep and wide tool belt. So
All right.
sometimes it's about interpreting dreams. Sometimes it's about, people have visions and things like that when they do guided meditations or just shamanic journey work or things like that. So some of it's that, interpreting symbolic language. I also work with people on developing their symbolic language vocabulary so that they can interpret their own stuff, because that's the language of spirit. Spirit
Yeah.
speaks in symbols. It
Yeah.
doesn't really, sometimes they'll talk to you in words, but the richer conversation, and for people who are doing readings and for mediumship and for anything where you're talking to spirit, you really need to learn how to develop that vocabulary with your guides, because that gives you deep, deep layers of meaning that if you're insisting on having it be a verbal conversation, you're going to miss out on a lot of the conversation. And so I work with people on developing that. I work with people on advanced energetics. How do I do weather witching, for instance? One of my clients had a hurricane come into her house. Hurricane Ida was coming straight at her house. She lived in Baton Rouge, or she lives in Baton Rouge. And she was like, I'm going to get hit by a big, big, big hurricane. What do I do? I said, well, here's how you're going to modify your wards so that you can protect your property in a better way and slow down the wind. And then here's what you're going to do. You're going to go and talk to the hurricane and ask her to move. And she was like, I could do that? I'm like, oh, yep, you're going to do that. And she's like, okay. And at the last second, against every model that the meteorologist had, she swerved 20 miles away from my client at the last second to miss her. So the eye didn't come straight over her, which it was supposed to do. And it shifted 20 miles out of the way. And she had 150-mile-an-hour winds. They had one tree that fell, and it was at the very edge of her property. There was a kiddie pool in the back of an open slat trailer, the open slat sides, right? Low trailer, empty kiddie pool, plastic kiddie pool sitting in the back that did not move, didn't get blown anywhere, didn't move. And all of her neighbors had down limbs, down trees, down everything. And they all looked at her and said, why is your yard so pristine? And she's like, well, funny story, but.
Could you imagine? Oh my God.
So, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's working on the energetics of their business, because I work on that too. And sometimes I'm reading the energy of a potential partnership. I had a client who was going to go in and do a consulting for equity deal where he would come in and be the CMO for the company and get a part of the company and as well as his salary. And he was going to move his family across to another state. And he said, can you just check this company out for me before we go? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And I said, this is a family owned company, right? And he's like, yeah, because he hadn't told me that. And I said, you've got a problem. I said, somebody in the family has been embezzling funds and this company is not actually fiscally solvent. They're going to be bankrupt in very short order. You need to not go. And he called the company and said, hey, could you take a closer look at the books for me? Because something doesn't look quite right. He didn't say what it was, but in the course of looking, they discovered the embezzlement and they shuttered the doors within a couple of months.
Oh, shit.
It was an uncle who had embezzled like $60,000 or $70,000 from the company. And it was enough to take them to the point where they could no longer be viable.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
So it just depends on the person and it depends on what we're dealing with as to what I do. So,
But you're running a coaching certification program right now,
yes.
right?
Yeah. So I'm teaching people how to become spiritual coaches, and I'm doing it. So it's high ticket coaching. I'm teaching them how to be a high ticket coach, and I'm giving them the use of my programs that I've been teaching for years. They're proven programs established with great reviews and testimonials and whatever. And so what I do is they first go through the program itself. So this is the first level program in my series. I have 3 levels. They can eventually get certified in all 3 if they want. And they come through the first level program. It's usually 4 months. They go through it in 2 because the understanding is that you're probably far enough along that you don't have to have that program. But you have to have the experience of being a student in the program because it's important to understand what it's like from their perspective. And then after the 2 months of doing that, then we bring them in and we start working with them I teach them energy scanning. And so this is a proprietary process that I developed. I go in and I look at each person's chakra. I look at the chakra and I say, okay, here are the blocks. And I did about 3,000 of these scans over the course of my life. And over the course of that time, I discovered 38 blocks that are pretty common for people on a spiritual path. And so I have them look for all of those blocks. And then we say, okay, is there anything else in here that I need to know? Because 3,000 scans, you get pretty good at knowing what's there, right? And the first thing they learn is that. And then that gives them a way to make some money while they're prospecting for business, right? So they do class and then I teach them how to do 2-hour classes. They start with my Boundaries for Empaths program, which teaches empaths how to hold their energy differently so that they don't have to feel what everybody else feels. And so that's the second thing they learn. And they can learn they do the course and then they sell people into the energy training, the energy scanning rather, and then they can bring them into the course work to do the work from there. And because the energy scan is a diagnostic tool, right? It tells you what the problems are. And so it identifies all the blocks that are to you stepping into the next level. That's what that's about. Okay. And so from there, they learn to do additional marketing and some sales, but sales not in a sleazy way, sales in a here, let me help you decide whether or not this is the right thing for you. And we're really just looking for a yes or no from the client, not like trying to make them say yes, right? It's is this right for you? Here, let me give you the information. So we do it from a really yummy sort of consultative way where you're just connecting with the person and talking with them. And then I do all of the back end. And so the back end is I put them on my website so they don't need their own. They don't have to build a Facebook page. They don't have to get a newsletter list. They don't have to get a merchant account. They don't have to set up a learning platform because they're using mine on all of these, right? They don't have to do any of the back end work. We do all the onboarding and the contracts, and we do all the customer service. And all they have to do is market, sell, and deliver on their content. And I even set them up. First, they will co-teach with me, and then they will co-teach with each other. And that way they can co-enroll into a program so that as they're slow getting the enrollments going, they still have enough people coming in and they have somebody as a backup. And Some people will choose to stay with that ongoing because it's nice to have a real vacation
Mhm.
or to be able to be sick or whatever, right? And, other people will do it all on their own eventually. But this whole process that takes about 6 months to get to that level. And then the next 6 months, we spend doing all of the work around what keeps you from being successful in business, what keeps you from being able to receive higher levels of income, what keeps you from being able to claim your worth, all of the pieces and parts that go into that. So we have a whole 6 months that we spend on that as well. So it is a deep dive into understanding how to be a great coach. And also, I also teach them how to coach. So they don't have to be certified coaches. I forgot that. They don't have to be certified coaches. They can just learn how to coach in the program. So you're doing a deep dive on how to be a great coach and how to run a high ticket group coaching program. So I talked to you about the dynamics of group coaching and all of that, small group. And then they also do a deep dive on their personal work. And so it's this lovely combination of things because business is going to require you to grow yourself. So if you want to be successful in business, you really got to grow yourself in the process. And so I put those two pieces together, just like in my seeker programs, I put together the two pieces that are most important, which is personal growth work and energy work. When you put those two pieces together, then you get transformations.
Yes.
So we're working at that level.
Yeah, because when I think about that program compared to others, most, like get certified now programs are just that one level. This is the how you do it. But the transformation piece, everybody knows that when you own a business, you learn a lot about who you are.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes much more than you want. Usually much more than you want.
Usually.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. A great deal more than you want. And so they get to basically have their hand held by you or get a hug.
Yeah, both.
Yeah. Yeah. Through 12 months.
12 months.
That is amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
And this kind of
And
stuff.
they can start selling within like 3 months because the first 2 months are doing the course yourself. And then the third month is about learning the energy scan process. And you can start selling as soon as you're done with that.
Right.
And so, if you're not ready to coach the program yet, you just enroll them into my course and then you're co-teaching with me. And, that's how that works. So, and you get commissions on that. So it works.
Now, do you ever work with people who are not interested in a business, but really looking to expand their spirituality or connect in some way to that world?
Yes. It's much less common, but yes. When I have somebody who's a serious spiritual seeker, then yes, I absolutely do work with them, but I tend to work with them. So there's two ways that I can work with them. Either I can work with them on where they can come into my courses and just do my courses. And so a lot of people come in and do it that way. But if somebody's really advanced and they're sort of past the level of the courses, then I can work with them on an apprenticeship or a shaman on call basis. So
Shaman on call? What? Tell me about that.
Many clients at that level, but because it's very much just I tend to do asynchronous communication on those. So like Voxer or Marco Polo or something like that, because people need what they need when they need it instead of like having a set meeting or whatever. It's just like beep, la 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 la, right? And then I come back and I answer or I may check their energy field, or I may do some clearing of their energy or do some healing work on them, or it just depends on the person and what the situation is. But I have a client right now who he's in Amsterdam. He runs a business and they don't have to run a business, but this guy happens to. And he called me up because he couldn't get himself to work. Like, I can't get myself to work. I just can't. And he's like a hardcore worker. So for him to not be able to work is like big deal. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said, I don't know. I just can't get myself to work. And I'm so frustrated. And I was talking to him and I was like, yeah, this is an inner child issue. I said, what is it that you're excited about right now that you're not giving yourself? And he said, oh, well, I really want the new iMac Pro. He said, but my computer is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I said, do you have the money for it? He said, yeah. I said, buy it. And he said, what? No, I can't justify. I'm like, your inner child is not going to let you do anything until you buy it. Until you give it a gift, because you're not giving it enough. You're not playing enough. You're not doing enough. You're super excited about this. You're going to get super creative with it. You've already got all these ideas about how you're going to use this. You need to give it to your inner child. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to order it. And he ordered it. And within the week, he had made like $15,000. And then he called me up like 2, 3 weeks later, and he's like, I can't get myself to do anything again. I said, did you get your MacBook? And he said, oh no, I canceled it. It was taking too long. And I said, are you kidding me? Did you not remember the conversation we had 3 weeks ago? I said, order it immediately. And he was like, oh crap, I forgot. And so he ordered it again, and he made $7,000 the next day. I'm like, yes, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Right?
My gosh, the proof was right there. I mean, 15 grand. How could you forget that?
Well, he did.
By the way, I'm totally sending you a Marco Polo that's like, la, 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 la. What a cool idea. So they get direct connect with you.
Yes.
When they need.
Yeah.
That is super cool. I like that idea. How fantastic.
Well, it's great for my clients who travel a lot, or they're in various and sundry time zones, and they want to talk at 3 a.m. and that, I'm like, great, just leave me a message and I will answer you as soon as I get up, as soon as I see it. And so, that's as I said, I can't do that with a lot of people, but I do have a few clients that I do that with. And so, I do have a couple of spaces open right now, but I can't do it with a lot of people because of the access level. Right.
Of course. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. That's amazing stuff. Do you also teach folks how to, like, because we were talking a little bit about, or like before, we really got into the actual official chat about like magical stories, like you've had magical experiences. Do you help people with that kind of stuff too? And what's been your experience?
Well, and that's the thing I really love about doing the spiritual practitioner program, the spiritual coach program, is because I get to talk to them at that level. But I also talk to my seeker clients about that as well. And, I meet people where they are. So sometimes they're like, I had this weird dream, and I literally had a client do the same thing you just did on one of my discussion groups last week. And sometimes it's I don't feel right. Like I had a client who had just flown from Europe to Seattle, and she was like, I don't feel right. And I checked in with her. I'm like, oh my God, there's this huge chunk that's been taken out of your aura, right? Like something just chomped on her while she was on the plane. And I was like, this is bad, because she had waited like days to ask me this question because we had a meeting scheduled, and it was already energetically getting gangrene, right? It was bad. And I was like, oh yeah, I need to be in person to do this right. And you're very far away from me. See if you could find somebody local who can help you with this. And she couldn't find anybody. And I was like, fine, let me deal. And so I tried to address it in its current state. And I was like, this isn't working. And so I literally just turned time backwards for her until it got to a level where I could work with it and fix it. And I've done that. Oh, yeah. Time is an illusion.
That is awesome. It's like a Harry Potter thing. Did you have a little necklace with the turn back?
So, but I've done that with people who were sick too. A friend of mine's sister had cancer, and it was like stage 4 breast cancer, and they were not sure it was going to be operable. And I was like, we don't have any proof of that. Well, we do, but we're going to ignore the proof of that. We're just going to pull time back, and I'm going to just pull it back so that I for her belief structure to be okay with it, I had to leave the cancer there, but I pulled it back enough that when they went in to cut it out, they said, oh, this is much better than we thought it was. And there were no infiltrations, and it was clean lines and clean margins. And they were like, oh, and they got it all. Right. Wow. And so I needed to leave it there so that she would see that there was something there for them to take out and it was okay in her head. I checked in with her higher self and it's like, yeah, for belief structure purposes, you need to have them take something out for her to believe it. I'm like, okay. So that's what we did.
Wow. So you're a healer too.
Yeah. Well, I mean that
Fun.
everything I do is healing work, right?
Yeah. Bottom
Kind of
line.
the core of my being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And did you have a mentor yourself or like some kind of someone to hold your hand too? Or was it
I've
always just
had
your spider?
I've had a lot of friends who were very knowledgeable along the way. I didn't have an official mentor per se, but I've had some very knowledgeable friends and some very knowledgeable people that I did retreats with and that I took courses from along the way. And a lot of it's just been spirit talking to me. It's so funny because I've done like 300 episodes of my podcast, and a friend of mine, yet another very good friend of mine who's very connected, she reached out when she was listening to my podcast. She's like, "Are you aware that you're channeling have the answers?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." And she's like, "Oh my God, but it doesn't even sound like you're channeling." I'm like, "Well, I've been channeling for 20 years, so I literally can just like, it's I'm aware I'm in connection when I'm saying the things, but it's not the same as when I would channel 20 years ago, where my voice would change and my cadence of speaking would change, and I would refer to people as dear one. And there was like all of these pieces and parts. And now it's just fully integrated as part of me. And so if you're not energetically tuned in, you won't know that I'm channeling a particular answer or whatever. So, I just open up and let the answer come through. And so I've done a lot of work with spirit on that. And so, a lot of the growth that I've done has been led by spirit.
Wow. I mean, you can't get a more pure source than that. I mean, right?
Yeah.
You have been held, your hands have been held, but not by a human being in a body. So something you said earlier just struck a memory for me. You said that the client outreached you saying, I don't feel right. It
Yeah.
made me think about recently, and then I perused your podcast and I went, Kelly's talked. Of course, of course, Kelle has talked about this. There's been a lot of, I just don't feel right in the last few months. And I didn't get to listen to this podcast episode, but you talked about major downloads happening.
Yes.
This was back in June that you published this podcast. Can you talk just briefly about that? Because in my personal experience, but also clients that I'm talking to, they're like, I just feel like something's off or wrong or different or shifting, or I don't know what it is. And I feel like it's just so many people that I think a lot of folks listening right now would get this. What
Yeah.
is it?
So there's a wide combination of factors happening right now. So one is that the pandemic itself was a massive trauma. And at the same time, it was also a hermitage, right? And so one of the things that happens in spiritual practice is that just before a major initiation, you go into a hermitage. And so we've all been in hermitage for a year and a half. And then we came out and we ignored all of our spiritual stuff. And I know this for a fact because I've talked to all my spiritual teacher friends, and they all said their businesses dropped dramatically in 2021 into 20, they really at the end of 2021 and in 2022, it was a low year. And so everybody was like running away from their hermitage. And now it's 2023, and we've had the astrological stuff that's been coming in and been hardcore for us, right? So we just came through the big Lionsgate transition. We're coming into a super blue moon at the end of the month, at the same time as Mercury is going retrograde, which Mercury retrograde is all about doing your inner work. And so we're astrologically being dragged back into that initiation process that we avoided in 2022. We're like, la, 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 I'm not listening. You can't make me, right? And so, people are also exhausted, right now. Like when I was talking in June, everybody was just flat out exhausted. They were just like, I'm sleeping and I'm still exhausted when I wake up, or I'm waking up in the middle of the night at like 3 a.m. and I can't get back to sleep, or, whatever. Right. But it was all just this exhaustion that was really overtaking everyone. And that was the time when everybody was getting these massive spiritual downloads to prep us for the initiation. The other thing that I'm seeing in people who are really spiritually tuned in is that they're all pulling back a bit. And I did that in March, April, May. And I literally rebranded and repositioned and really focused my business on the B2B side rather than the B2C side. I mean, the B2C side is still there, but I'm focusing on the business side and relaunching that. And I'm seeing spiritual teachers all across the board doing similar things, not necessarily rebranding, but just like pulling back and going, I'm going to take some time to go within and figure out what's important to me and what I want to do and where I want to spend my time. I got off a podcast I did earlier today with someone who said, I've hit the point where I'm at peace and I don't know where I'm going to go next. And I'm just sitting in this moment of questioning. There's a massive transition happening and it's impacting people at a very core level, right? Where they're feeling drawn outside of themselves, where they are being pulled into a new state of reality and a new way of being. And so this process is what in shamanism we refer to as a shamanic death. It's an identity shift. It's where the old you dies to make way for the new you to emerge. And that process is uncomfortable as crap. I call it foundational deconstruction because we're literally ripping out the foundation of who we believe ourselves to be. And so if I have a piece of advice for you during this process, it is this. Allow yourself to rip out all the foundations and then let yourself be fallow. Okay, because if you do this at various levels, right, you can do this at a small level or at a large level. I did this hardcore in the early 2000s, and I literally was not able to function without paying attention to what was happening. So I would get out of the shower with shampoo still in my hair. I would run into doorways because I didn't know where my edges were. All sorts of stuff, right? And I was unsafe to drive a car. And I did not drive for the entire period of this time. And so I spent about 3 weeks in this space. And what you have to do, though, is don't be in a hurry to put it back together again. Because what you think is important, what was a cornerstone of your foundation before, may not even exist in your new foundation. That was something I was floored to discover when my foundation started reforming. And things that were core to me were just not there anymore. And they were left off to the side. And I was like, oh, that was weird, right? But you got to let it emerge of its own accord rather than trying to force it. So just be in the moment with it and don't try to make it move faster than it is naturally going to move, because that will actually hamper the process and you will not make as much transformation as you were poised to do. And you'll have to do it again later. You don't want to have to do it again later.
No, oh my gosh. Very sound advice. It's, what you're saying too, because I was going to ask you this question and I thought, oh, what you're saying is making sense, because during COVID, for me, I wanted to be on a hermitage, but I'm a mental health practitioner. I couldn't be.
Right.
Everybody was gleaning for my attention. They needed me. Meanwhile, I'm an introvert having to be at home and I have people at home. I'm like, fucking leave. Okay.
Right.
They can't. And they're all extroverts. They all wanted to leave, but they couldn't. Right. So we were in this space. But now that you're saying what you're saying, because I'm in that space like right now, bumping into things and like dropping things and like, how the hell did that even happen? I don't even know how that happened. And I think it's because my energy is wanting to be in the hermitage again, like be there.
I
and
think it's because you're going through foundational deconstruction,
yes, yeah,
which
but
isn't about a hermitage. It's about foundational deconstruction. So
it's different.
yes,
Oh,
yes,
okay. Well,
yeah.
maybe my head is like, you better just lay back, girl, because you're going to be feeling some shit.
Well, and taking downtime during foundational deconstruction is not a bad idea. It's actually a really good idea. But the hermitage is about retreating from the world to be by yourself. And for empaths, that's more important than anybody else because, you know, of the way that we hold our energy fields until we learn how to do it differently. But it's about really getting clear about who you are and what's important to you and just finding the stillness within you through the quiet space. That's what a hermitage is about.
That's delayed for me, right?
Yeah,
It's been delayed.
obviously. Yeah. Yeah. You definitely had a delay on that, but you're still going through the work because you're doing foundational deconstruction right now and you had your downloads. So you're still on the path. But yes, I would recommend some downtime for that
Oh my
because,
God.
yeah, you're going to need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Fortunately, I've been paying attention to my physical wellness and, you know, taking care of my body. And so that has helped. But
That's a huge help. Yes.
whoo, it's crazy. And everybody in my community is like, WTF is going on?
And to make things even worse, um,
Oh no.
oh my God.
I'm going to end right now. No.
Okay.
Kidding.
Well, you know, the whole pandemic was a response to a bunch of baby witches on TikTok cursing the moon and the fae, mostly the moon.
Oh God.
So, you know, this is one of those things where beginners, you know, if your elders say this can't be done, they mean it shouldn't be done. Okay. And so these elders told these baby witches that you can't curse the moon. And they said, hold my beer. And
Oh
they
God.
went about doing it, not realizing that the moon is a reflective surface. And so we only see the moon in reflection, right? And so if you curse the moon, it bounces. And now the fun part is that it bounces wider because you're so far away. And so it hit the entire earth, the side of the earth that was facing the moon. And every spiritual person who had a multiplier in their energy field for attack had a multiplier that automatically kicked in and bounced it back. And the earth rotated and it bounced back and it hit and it bounced and it bounced and it bounced and it bounced for months.
Oh my
And
God.
Spirit sent me one of my students who said, did you hear about the TikTok witches that cursed the moon? And because I told her, I said, I've had this vision of the entire world being underneath, you know, how you batten down the hatches on a boat when you're expecting a storm, you know, and the 4 points of connection and the black tarp thing that goes across the canvas, you know, and I had this image of everyone on the planet being underneath these tarps, these canvas battens, right? And I'm like, what is that? And she said, oh, did you hear about the baby witches who cursed them? And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Are you serious? And she's like, no, I'm serious. And then she's like, they cursed the fae too. I said, the fae, I'm not worried about. The fae will be fine. Moon? And she was like, yeah. And so I went and I looked and because I couldn't find it because I was, you know, I'd been looking for what was causing this for a while, but who thinks to look at the moon? You know, I mean, I didn't even think to like leave the planet to look at it. I'm like, what? And so I went up and looked, and sure enough, there's this shock wave going back and forth of this curse. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so I thankfully, my first husband was a oceanographic engineer and had talked to me about interrupting waves. And I went, oh, I just need a wave to go across it to interrupt the wave. And so I just created that wave to go across it and broke the pattern so that it dissipated. And so that was in like February. No, that was much later. It was months later. But and so I broke the pattern, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, fine. And then I went and talked to the Fae and said, we're very sorry. You know, I'm dealing with it. They said, we have children too. Like, it was okay. They were standing behind their shields and they were just like, whatever, we're fine. I'm like, yeah, okay.
They sound cool.
they are in their own way. And so 2 or 3 months later, I was trading readings with a friend of mine who's an alchemist. And he said, this is very strange. I've never had this happen before. And I said, what? He said, the moon is offering to help you. And I said, yeah, that would be because of this.
Makes sense. Yeah.
He's like, I've never run into this before in all my years of doing this. I've never had the moon. The moon is like neutral. The moon doesn't give a crap about anybody. I'm like, yeah, well.
How cool. Oh my, it must just be fascinating to be able to like bounce ideas and readings and stuff like that off of people up there with you. That is so cool. Honestly, I could muse with you forever. Like, do we have a month?
Well, we're in the group together. We have as much time as we want
for the podcast. Like, there are specific things I want to talk about. Like, now I'm interested in the Fae. These are all things that I'm just beginning to explore on the podcast because, you know, I've done mental health stuff forever, and this isn't part of mental health, although it should be.
It should, yes.
By the way, my being shunned, psychology people are like,
yes.
And I'm like, okay. All right. Well, but my grandmother told me I had to do this shit. So she's way more powerful than you people. So
there you go. So I did an episode on the Fae, if you're curious. There is an episode on
good. I will link it on the show notes.
There's an episode on elves. So
I must link that up. But if we can talk about it too on the podcast, that would be amazing at some point.
Anytime.
That would be so cool. I think people would really love to dig into that topic, these specifics. Today, we kept it quite general in your history and story and things that you've experienced. I love that. And what you do to support people in case they are interested in working with you. Everything's going to be linked underneath the show notes, obviously. All right. Well, I'm going to have you back on the show. Thank you for being willing. And thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Fun.
Good times.
I'm hoping you got a useful nugget or two from today's podcast episode. May you be well, and I'll see you next time.